Hey everyone, welcome to the show. You know how we always think about history as these big empires and powerful rulers? What if I told you that the most interesting stories, the ones that really challenge what we think we know, are happening way out on the edges of those empires?
Yeah, it's like flipping the script, right? Instead of focusing on the centers of power, we're looking at the fringes, the places that have often been ignored or dismissed.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today with Owen Rees's The Far Edges of the Known World, a new history of the ancient past. It's ancient history, but with a twist. Instead of just going over the same old empires, Rees takes us to these really unexpected locations, places like prehistoric Kenya, Roman Britain, even beyond, to show how they actually played a much bigger role in shaping history than we usually give them credit for. It's all about interconnectedness, right? Seeing how these seemingly isolated places were actually part of these vast networks of trade, cultural exchange, you name it.
And that's one of the things I loved about this book. Like, did you know there's evidence of potential trade routes between Cornwall, England, and Canaan in the Bronze Age? Based on tin ingots, that's a huge distance.
It just shows you how much more connected the ancient world was than we might think. And these far edges, they weren't just passively receiving influence, they were actively shaping things.
Totally. Another thing that really stood out to me was how the book focuses on everyday life in these places. Like, there's this site in Kenya, Lothagam North, which is this incredible burial site built by nomadic pastoralists. Not exactly who you'd expect to be building these massive
Yeah,
structures,
I mean,
right?
it makes you question the whole idea that only settled societies were capable of that kind of complex organization.
Okay, so were there things I didn't love as much? Hmm. Well, the book covers a lot of ground, which is great, but sometimes I felt like I wanted to spend more time in certain places.
I get that. It's tough to strike that balance between breadth and depth.
And sometimes, because we're dealing with these less documented areas, the author has to make some educated guesses based on limited evidence, which is fine, but if you're someone who needs absolute certainty, you might find some of it a little speculative.
Sure, but that's kind of the nature of the beast with ancient history, especially when you're looking at the fringes. You have to piece things together and consider different possibilities.
Overall, though, I thought The Far Edges of the Known World was really eye-opening. I'd give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
Hmm.
So let's get into some of the specific places Rees takes us to. I think it's a great way to see what we can learn when we shift our focus to these far edges.
Sounds good to me.
So let's start with that site in Kenya we mentioned, Lothagam North. This is a burial site, but it's also a monumental structure built by nomadic pastoralists. What makes this so significant?
Well, like you said, it challenges the traditional view that you need a settled agricultural society to have that kind of monumental architecture. It suggests that nomadic people, people who were constantly on the move, were capable of really complex social organization and shared ritual practices.
And it wasn't just a random pile of rocks. This was a carefully planned and constructed site. What can you tell us about the artifacts found there?
The interesting thing is that the artifacts, while they definitely indicate burial practices, they don't show any real signs of hierarchy or major differences in wealth among the people buried there. So it supports this idea of a more egalitarian social structure, which isn't always what we associate with monument building.
Fascinating. So from there, Rees takes us to the Great Cataract region of Sudan, which is where ancient Egypt, this major power center, bordered Nubia to the south, which was often considered its periphery. What's interesting about the relationship between these two areas?
What's really important to understand is that it wasn't just a simple case of Egyptian dominance. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of cultural exchange, and mutual influence. For example, they found Nubian pottery in Egyptian settlements along the border, which suggests that there was intermingling and maybe even adoption of Nubian customs.
So it wasn't just about trade or conflict?
Nope. It shows how fluid those cultural boundaries really were, and how people on the fringes could actively shape the cultures they were interacting with. Power dynamics weren't the only thing that determined how ideas and practices flowed.
Okay, moving on. The book takes us to Megiddo in ancient Israel. This was a city strategically located on major trade routes. How did its edge location play into its story?
Megiddo was like a crossroads. It connected Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean world, so it was super important strategically. There are these letters called the Elamarna letters, which are basically diplomatic correspondence from that period. They show how the rulers of Megiddo had to be really clever and play all sides to keep things in balance.
So it wasn't just a pawn in a bigger game.
Not at all. Megiddo was definitely influenced by its powerful neighbors, but it also maintained a degree of autonomy, and it played its own role in the politics and trade networks of the region. And if you look at the archaeological finds, they show goods from all over the place, which tells you just how important it was as a hub in a much wider economic system.
Now, you mentioned evidence of tin trade in the Bronze Age earlier, and I think that's one of the most mind-blowing examples of how connected these far edges could be. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah. So Rees talks about these tin ingots found off the coast of Israel. When they did an isotopic analysis of these ingots, it suggested they might have come from Cornwall, England. If that's true, it means that people were trading across these vast distances, linking Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean way earlier than we thought possible.
That's incredible. It must have taken some serious maritime skills to pull that off.
Absolutely. It points to sophisticated seafaring capabilities and extensive trade networks that we're only just beginning to understand.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the Greek world. Now, instead of Athens or Sparta, Rees takes us to Olbia, which was on the northern coast of the Black Sea, right next to the Scythian nomads. What does Olbia tell us about how different cultures interacted on these frontiers?
Oldie is a perfect example of what happens when two very different ways of life collide. You've got the settled Greek colonists on one side and the nomadic Scythians on the other. While there were times of conflict, there was also a ton of cultural exchange. You can see evidence of both sides adopting customs and even religious practices from the other.
We even hear stories of Scythian rulers embracing Greek culture.
Exactly. There are accounts of Scythian elites taking part in Greek rituals and using Greek-style stuff in their everyday lives. It just goes to show how fluid cultural identity could be in these frontier zones. The lines we draw today weren't always so clear-cut back then.
Shifting westward, Rees looks at Massalia, which is modern-day Marseille. This was a Greek colony in Gaul that Cicero, the Roman orator, called the extremity of the world. What made Massalia so special, despite being seen as this far-flung outpost?
It's funny because even though it was considered remote, Massalia actually became a really powerful maritime force in the Western Mediterranean. Its location was perfect for trade and exploration, and Massalian sailors were known for venturing out into the Atlantic, pushing the boundaries of what the Greeks knew about geography. There's this guy, Pythias, who might have even reached Britain.
So instead of being a barrier, its edge location was actually an advantage.
Exactly. It allowed Massalia to connect the Mediterranean world with the interior of Europe, and it facilitated all sorts of trade and cultural exchange in both directions.
And the book goes on to talk about a bunch of other fascinating edge locations, from Hadrian's Wall in Roman Britain to Aksum in East Africa. What are some of the big takeaways from all these examples?
They all point to the same things: the interconnectedness of the ancient world, the blurriness of cultural boundaries, and the fact that communities on the periphery weren't just passive bystanders. They had their own agency, they shaped their own destinies, and they contributed to the bigger picture in some really important ways.
So it's not about this single center of civilization radiating outwards.
Right. It's a much more nuanced and dynamic picture. It
Yeah.
shows that innovation and cultural exchange were happening all over the place, even in the places we might not expect.
I love that. So if you're interested in learning more about these far edges and how they shaped the ancient world, definitely check out Owen Rees' The Far Edges of the Known World. You can find a link to it on Amazon in the description below. And while you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did.
What was the most surprising edge you encountered today? Let us know in the comments. We're always curious to hear your thoughts, and who knows, your comments might even inspire our next deep dive.
And don't forget to share this with anyone you know who loves history and uncovering those hidden connections that shaped our world.
Until next time, happy exploring.
See you then.